A blade catches the last orange light of the day, and the cow does not flinch. A young herder kneels in the dust beside her, one hand resting flat against her flank, steady as a heartbeat. He is not here to kill her. In a few seconds, it will be over, and she will walk back to the herd as though nothing happened at all. What he takes from her tonight is older than slaughter, and far stranger to eyes that have never seen it before. Her blood. I have crouched in that same dust more times than there are stars left to count, and I have never once seen fear in the animal's eyes, only patience. The kind of patience that comes from doing something the same careful way for longer than anyone can remember. For more than a century, outsiders who passed through the grasslands of East Africa carried this image home with them. And in the retelling, it grew teeth. Blood drinkers, they whispered in colonial outposts and missionary letters. Warriors who fed on their own cattle like something out of a fever dream. The rumor traveled faster than the truth ever could, all the way into European drawing rooms, long before anyone thought to ask the one question that actually mattered. Why? The answer does not begin with cruelty. It begins with geography. Stretch a map across the Great Rift Valley of Kenya and Tanzania, and you will find land that refuses to cooperate with a farmer. The rains are thin and unreliable. The soil bakes hard for half the year, cracking into plates you could lift with two hands. But the grass never stops. Mile after mile of it, gold and green, feeding herds that can survive where crops cannot. For the Maasai, the Samburu, and the other Maa-speaking peoples who have herded cattle across this land for centuries, that grass is not scenery. It is the only reliable food source for hundreds of miles in any direction. And cattle are the machine that turns it into something a human body can actually use. Here is where the mystery starts to unravel. In most farming cultures, wealth is measured by what fills the granary. Among the cattle-herding peoples of the Rift Valley, wealth is measured by what still walks. A large living herd is a bank account, a marriage dowry, a family's insurance against drought, and a mark of status, all bound into one animal at a time. Slaughtering a cow for food erases a piece of that wealth permanently. And in a land where the next failed rainy season is never more than a bad month away, permanent losses are not taken lightly. So the question these communities faced, generation after generation, was never how to get the most meat from a cow. It was how to get the most life from a cow, without ever having to end it. Blood was the answer. The method is precise, almost surgical, and it has been refined over an enormous span of time. A single animal is chosen from the herd and held gently but firmly by several hands, calm rather than restrained. A small, exact incision is opened at the jugular, traditionally with an arrow shot at close range, angled just enough to open the vein without tearing it. The blood is caught in a hollowed gourd or clay pot set beneath the wound. Once enough has been collected, the cut is sealed with the paste of ash and mud, and the bleeding stops almost immediately. Within days, the wound has closed over. The cow returns to grazing as though the whole event never touched her. No single animal is drawn from this way more than once every few weeks, and the herd rotates, so the task never falls twice on the same creature in a short stretch of time. It is not a wound inflicted carelessly. It is closer to a harvest, timed and measured the way a farmer times a harvest of grain. What the colonial travelers read as savagery was, in fact, one of the most disciplined food systems ever built by a pastoral people. It let a family draw protein, iron, and calories from their herd on a near-constant basis, without ever spending down the capital that herd represented. Where crops might fail and markets might not exist for days of walking in any direction, that discipline was not a curiosity worth gossiping about back home. It was survival, engineered, and the blood itself does real work. Mixed with milk into a thick, dark drink, it becomes dense with nutrients, rich in protein and iron, heavy enough to sit in the stomach through a long day of walking cattle across open plains. It is given to women recovering from childbirth. It is given to warriors returning from long journeys or a hard fight. It is given to the sick and to boys healing after the rites that mark their passage into manhood. Elders reach for it after a rough night, the way another culture might reach for black coffee. At weddings, a cup of it can open the celebration before a single word of the ceremony is spoken. Scholars who have studied Maasai culture describe the community's relationship to cattle blood as both an everyday meal and something closer to sacred, depending entirely on the moment it is poured. Not one or the other, both at once. Here is where legend and fact need to be pulled apart carefully, because for a very long time they were tangled into the same story. The vampiric mythology that grew up around these practices in Western accounts, the idea of blood drinking as something feral, something violent, was never rooted in what was actually happening on the ground. It was rooted in discomfort and in a failure of curiosity that outlasted the explorers who started it. The historical record, once anthropologists actually sat with these communities long enough to document, rather than merely react, tells a far calmer story. Careful animal husbandry, deep ecological knowledge passed down without ever being written on a single page. A food system built for a landscape most outsiders never stayed long enough to understand. Modern science has since added its own strange twist to the story. Researchers studying Maasai communities as far back as the 1930s, and again decades later, found startlingly low rates of heart disease and remarkably low cholesterol levels in a population eating a diet built almost entirely around animal protein and fat, the exact kind of diet that would set off alarms in a Western clinic. Some scientists have floated the idea that generations of this dietary pattern may have nudged the Maasai toward a localized biological adaptation, bodies tuned over time to process animal fat more efficiently than most. That theory remains a hypothesis, not a settled fact, and it deserves to be treated that way. But the underlying pattern is well documented, and it only deepens the mystery in a different direction. What looked from the outside like a dangerous or primitive diet may in fact be one of the more quietly sophisticated nutritional systems ever built around a single animal, on a stretch of land that forgives almost nothing else. None of this means the tradition has survived untouched. Over the last century, colonial land seizures pushed many Maasai and Samburu communities off ancestral grazing grounds to make way for national parks and game reserves that now draw tourists from every continent. Recurring droughts, sharpened in recent years by a shifting climate, have thinned herds that families spent generations building, one calf at a time. Younger generations, pulled toward cities and different diets, are inheriting a version of pastoral life that looks far less certain than it did for their grandparents. The ritual persists, but less often now. mostly among families still committed to the older rhythms of herding, still willing to wake before dawn and walk the cattle out across land that keeps shrinking around them. And yet, it has not disappeared. In villages scattered across the Rift Valley, that same quiet scene still plays out in the low light of morning or evening. A chosen animal, a steady hand, a small wound that heals in days, a gourd of dark liquid carried back into a smoke-filled home where a family is waiting. It was never a leftover from some forgotten age. It is a working answer to a question almost as old as the herds themselves. How do you feed a family, season after season, drought after drought, without ever spending down the one asset that keeps you alive at all? The blade catches the light one more time. The cow does not flinch, because she has done this before, and she will do it again next month, and the month after that. What looked, for more than a century, like something savage was never that at all. It was patience, dressed up as ritual. It was survival, refined until it looked like art. And long after the fire outside that home is burned down to embers, the herd will still be standing out in the dark, alive, breathing, waiting for morning to come and start the whole quiet cycle again.